समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
आप समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Lieutenant General Amarjeet Singh or Amar Kalkat passed away on April 22. This series was actually to begin that day. It just so happened by the time I came back from his funeral and I thought I will record this, that the news came from Pahalgam and the news cycle then completely moved on. That's the reason this series of First Person Second Draft is coming to you now. This is the second part and there will be the third part tomorrow. He's one of the greatest heroes of Indian Army, having fought in the 1971 war, having commanded IPKF in Jaffna, and after that he was the first GOC, the founder GOC-in-C of the Army Training Command, RTRAC. He won both for an officer of that his seniority, the highest wartime award, that is Sarvottam Yudh Seva Medal, the first recipient of that award in India, and also the Param Vishisht Seva Medal, which is a service medal. Distinguished service, Gurkha Regiment from the 8th. He commanded his own battalion, 5-8 Gurkha Regiment, in the 1971 war in Cham. I wrote much about this in 2013 when Shujit Sarkar's film Madras Cafe had come out. Much has had to be updated. In fact, many of the people mentioned in that story have subsequently passed on. And this is a good day also as a tribute to General Kalkat to bring you back this story because he had a stellar role in this. We called it India's dirty little war in Jaffna. Dirty little war is in quotes and you will know why as I go along, where stories of heroism came up amid some ineptitude and also new friendships grew under fire. And this is a story almost 40 years, let's say 35 years after IPKF. The passing away of General A.S. Kalkat, the decorated hero of Op Pawan, Sarvottam Yudh Seva Medal, remember, that brings back the truth of a military disaster. What a military disaster which had a lot of brilliance, military brilliance in parts, but in the larger picture, strategically and politically, it was a disaster. I take you back to the beginnings of the story as far as my reporter's notebook is concerned. India's unexpected war in Sri Lanka caught me on the wrong foot by 12,000 kilometers. I was still finishing the last month of my sabbatical year in Washington when the fighting broke out. And as I returned home, the media was full of coverage, often loaded, of the IPKF disaster in Sri Lanka's Jaffna Peninsula in the early weeks of the fighting. Loaded because the Bofors scandal, the Type 209 submarine scandal and many other missteps had already made Rajiv Gandhi the target of widespread attacks. Sri Lanka was therefore seen as a Babalo-class political stupidity rather than military incompetence. In the process, we were guilty of both insensitivity to Indian soldiers, their courage and sacrifice, and also conveniently overlooking the complacence of our higher commanders. Now, this was obviously not a war we were going to ever lose. Although my friend Hardeep Puri, now our minister, who was then our first secretary in Colombo under J.N. Dixit, sometimes tells you sort of semi-light-heartedly that there was one evening so tense that it felt as if Palali, that was the Jaffna Air Base and IPKF's 54 Infantry Division headquarters, Palali was going to fall. That's it. That was half a joke. Hardeep had just seen the truce agreement he had so painstakingly drafted and signed with Mahataya. Mahataya was the man called Malaya in Madras Cafe, Shujit Sarkar's Madras Cafe, who was massacred along with 287 of his loyalist soldiers. It is creditable how much of that initial messiness Shujit Sarkar got accurately in his film Madras Cafe. The fact that early IPKF patrols were routinely ambushed, pinned down and annihilated, how its officers were picked out by snipers, how the LTTE seemed to have inside information on all IPKF moves, More about this I will tell you later. The most creditable footage in Shujit Sarkar's film, however fleeting and sensitively handled, is of the tigers ransacking Indian soldiers' bodies and picking weapons, souvenirs, and trophies from them. Note particularly a boyish Sikh soldier sitting frozen in rigor mortis. That quality of research you did not expect from a mainstream Indian filmmaker, and we will shortly explain why. A lot more is also coming back to me now as I've been thinking about General Kalkat, because as he wrote in an article for us for ThePrint, you will see a screenshot of that article on your screens, but also we'll share the full link with you on how he got a call from the High Command to go to Palali and take over, as there seemed to be a disaster playing out with the IPKF, and the IPKF commander then, his predecessor, had been sent on leave, as he writes. By the time he went in, IPKF seemed to be in a very bad way, having suffered very heavy casualties and in some cases, in fact, essentially pushed back into its fortress at Palali Air Base. On my return to India from Washington, I was deeply saddened, even offended by the celebratory coverage of the war. Cover pictures of Indian soldiers' bodies, close-ups of tigers displaying caps, identity cards, boots of dead Indian soldiers. You had never seen an Indian war covered like that. You haven't since, and you never will, hopefully. One reason the media by and large had taken that position also was how unpopular Rajiv Gandhi had become. And because this was seen as his stupidity or his big error, a lot of it is highlighted like that, and the fact that you had an army fighting in Sri Lanka, that was overlooked. And that is what I was ranting about, even in my newsroom. Of course, I also felt rotten having missed out on the big story, which for the magazine, India Today magazine, was covered by Anita Pratap, who later worked for Time magazine and CNN. The photographer accompanying her, Shyam Tekwani, was subsequently my travelling partners in Sri Lanka multiple times. I did get into many arguments in our newsroom, India Today newsroom, on how we had covered the story and why it was necessary to now reconstruct what exactly had gone wrong and the lessons learned, etc., etc. My reward was being assigned that story, and in the third week of December 1987, I landed in Colombo, having been briefed, in fact, lectured more like it, by General Sundarji, then Army Chief, his DGMO, Lieutenant General, later Army Chief Bipin Chandra Joshi, BC Joshi, and their staff. Since association by events is sometimes the safest way to remember dates, particularly if you do not maintain elaborate notebooks, as in my case, hardly any, and notoriously the sketchiest ones, I can tell you I was on my way from Jaffna to Colombo in a rented Mitsubishi Lancer on 24th of December 1987 and had just crossed Vavunia when everything came to a standstill. Angry, grieving mobs blocked the streets. MGR had just died. That's how I know the precise date. I remember the precise date. A month had been declared by the Tamils there. I couldn't go forward or back. Knew no Tamil, had no food or shelter. And you know how early the winter sets that far in the east? But I was lucky again, as an IPKF patrol of Maratha Light Infantry Regiment passed by, and its leader, then a very young Captain C.K. Menon, offered me shelter in his camp. From him and his colleagues that night in that small camp in the danger zone, I heard my first stories of the ordeal Indian soldiers had just been through. We connected decades later at the ITC Grand Central Hotel in Mumbai, where he was serving in a senior capacity. Having left the army as a colonel, he moved up long distance up the ladder in ITC hotels. And if that isn't sufficient evidence that the myth called reporter's luck is a reality, let me also tell you who came to my rescue similarly on the drive back. Now caught closer to Jaffna, the first time Vavunia was the other edge of the battlefield. This was the heart of the battlefield on the return journey. This was closer to Jaffna, with the prospect of crossing the infamous sniper and mine-infested lagoon at dusk. A patrol of the Gorkha regiment was passing by, and the wiry young captain leading it suggested I take shelter with him at his camp overnight. He said his company had just lost several lives in an ambush in the same area, and he said, now this is dusk, nobody knows who you are. Any side, either they or us, could be shooting at any moving shadows. So it's not safe to go right now. Stay with me overnight. I had in fact mostly forgotten about the incident until at the annual Hindustan Times Leadership Summit dinner in November 2015. Then Army Chief General Dalbir Singh asked me if I remembered the young Gurkha officer who had sheltered me on my way back from Jaffna. It was he, wiry now as then. True enough, after absorbing the initial setbacks, the Indian Army, had taken and secured the entire Jaffna Peninsula. But the price had been shocking. 350 killed and more than 1,100 wounded in this month-long charge. The casualty rate at 7% of all troops involved was twice as high as in our wars against Pakistan. One of the 5 brigades that assaulted Jaffna, the 41st, which was airlifted on 17th October and was launched straight on the coastal road axis leading to Jaffna Fort, had 272 casualties, one brigade, or 17%, 17% of its strength. That's humongous casualties by any yardstick. The 72nd, the same brigade, also suffered heavy casualties among its officers, including its deputy brigade commander, Colonel D.S. Sarao. The heavily armored BMP infantry fighting vehicle he was riding was blown up by a 200 kg mine. The 13.2-ton vehicle was tossed more than 30 feet, and its doors, each weighing more than 250 kg, were found more than 100 yards away. Another illustrious battalion, 4x5 Gurkhas, had its commandant and all but one of its majors killed just over one afternoon. This is not a war anybody had expected to fight and regrettably prepared to fight. I wrote a 5-page reconstruction and analysis headlined in a rush to vanquish in the 31st January 1988 issue of India Today. If we can find a screenshot on the India Today archives, we'll display that to you. T-72 tanks, Mi-25 helicopter gunships had all come without ammunition, right? Because they never thought there was going to be any firefight. So tanks, helicopter gunships had come without ammunition. Infantry had been airlifted from places as far as Gwalior and then thrown into battle without even 3 hours of familiarization. There is no excuse for this kind of complacence. The IPKF's first casualties were 5 soldiers from its finest unit, the Para-Commandos, waylaid by the LTTE while casually going on a jeep to collect provisions on 8th of October. They were burnt in full public view with tires thrown around their necks. That disastrous beginning spilled over into the most talked about setback then, the combined heli-dropped Para-Commando and infantry raid on 11th of October on the Jaffna University campus, where Prabhakaran and his top aides were living. In fact, in the article that General Kalkat wrote for ThePrint, he said he was told that the garrison commander at Jaffna was told by his intelligence that the top commanders of LTTE were meeting at Jaffna University hostel, and this was a good opportunity for the army to go and grab them, go and catch them. That's why Kalkat was sent there in such a hurry to relieve the IPKF commander. What happened with the operation meanwhile? How exactly did the operation go wrong? Only 2/3 of the commandos from the battalion 10 para commando could be landed, and this infantry company, 13 Sikh light infantry, which was to secure the landing ground, which was a football field from where IPKF helicopters used to routinely pick up LTTE commanders for talks. That infantry unit failed to fetch up, and the Special Assault Forces contingent was reduced to fighting a battle for survival instead, because they were stranded there. As for the Sikh light infantry of the company that was to land, only a platoon could be landed, and that too in the wrong playground, several built-up lanes away. The rest of the company could not land as helicopters came under very accurate medium machine gun fire. The platoon, led by Major Birinder Singh, a close relation of diplomat turned politician K. Natwar Singh, was encircled and wiped out after a valiant fight. Only one of the 30, Sepoy Gora Singh, survived and was taken prisoner by the LTTE. It is believed Prabhakaran displayed him to his fighters, kicked him in public and said, "Let him go. So he will tell them not to fight us again." Gora Singh, however, brought back the story of one of Indian Army's most poignant battles ever, where out of ammunition, the last 3 survivors even carried out a final suicidal bayonet charge. The LTTE looted and stripped all the bodies, piled them in the nearby Nagaraja Vihar temple on public display for some time. Then it cremated them after simply throwing a barrel of petrol over the heap of bodies. That's why it's been so revolting to see some Tamil Nadu politicians feeling so sorry for the tigers. Fortunately, that phenomenon has been fading away. This is also why we had said earlier that in Madras Cafe's footage of the first battles, along with the young Sikh soldier, remember the Sikh light infantry platoon in Raigar Mortis, and the LTTE boys plundering the bodies, was so remarkable. It was the first instance of Indian filmmakers challenging the old Hakikat, Hindustan ki Kasam / border notion of Indian war cinema. I walked around the ground weeks later and still found shreds of the Sikhs' uniforms. In the nearby building, there was more evidence of the sickening plunder of those bodies: pieces of Sikh light infantry battle fatigues, cross belts, boots, water bottles, epaulets, all mixed with .50 mg big MMG medium machine gun shells, sometimes ankle deep. That tells you how much fire that one lost platoon withstood in the course of those valiant 12 hours. I wish somebody would just make a film on that valiant lost platoon. The commandos, paracommandos, separated in the football ground, had done a little better, with 6 killed and 9 wounded. That is a little better. They were trained special forces soldiers, so they went into built-up areas, hid themselves and protected themselves there, fighting off anybody who tried coming to look for them. In a built-up area, you can defend yourselves quite efficiently if you are trained and motivated to do this. The commandos were finally rescued in an audacious and brilliantly innovative operation by their commanding officer, the para-commando unit's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Dalbir Singh, covered by 3 T-72 tanks of 65 Armoured Regiment. Since by now it was known that the Tigers had mined all approaches to Jaffna University, Major Anil Kaul, the tank commander, his father, by the way, had raised this regiment, 65th Armoured. Anil Kaul remembered a railway line skirting the campus and decided to drive the tanks over the rail tracks instead, for once surprising the LTTE. But his own tank was hit on the turret by an RPG shell or maybe an MMG burst, and he lost one eye and a hand as he bravely peeped out to navigate. His inspired troops put him on morphine, fought on and brought about the heroic rescue of the stranded commandos. The colonel called with an eye patch that we got used to seeing on our TV channels, usually furious over some military issue or the other, and who once famously demanded that I be hanged upside down from a tree and flogged after our story on the army movements on the night of 16 January 2012 that spooked Manmohan Singh government. He was the same valiant cavalryman. He also wrote me a very warm email in 2013 reminding me I had visited him in hospital where he was reviving then. Even in the hospital, his spirits were all there. His eye gone, one hand gone, his spirit was all there. He also said to me he now wanted to contest in 2014 elections as an independent. I failed to dissuade him despite trying. He didn't listen. He passed away, by the way, on 27 December 2017. The army gave him a ceremonial funeral at Broad Square, as they did for General Kalkat. Pardon me for leapfrogging the calendar, but Colonel Kaul's latter-day anger and then affection apart, in Sri Lanka, I got nothing but large-hearted access, affection and hospitality from the army. I did have only one tough scrap, although well-meaning. It was in Batticaloa in September 1989, where after a briefing and lunch with the GOC of the 57 Mountain Division headquartered there, I was stepping out to go to the city. As Shyam Tekwani, the photographer, and I came out of the general's ops room, we found 3 army trucks and a jeep, machine guns mounted, tarpaulins ripped on the trucks, and battle-ready Sikh soldiers spilling over from each truck. "This is your escort," said the general. We protested that we were safest as journalists and going out without any such convoy would endanger our lives and those of his soldiers, as the LTTE may just presume that we were some Indian VIPs who needed so much protection, so much bandobast. The argument became heated and the irritated general gave up on us, saying, "All right, then you are on your own and I am taking the chopper to an outpost. Then, if something happens to you in this area, at least I will not be responsible. But you are being stupid anyway." Quote closed. He was, of course, speaking from sincere concern and from the heart. He was a wonderful soldier and his name is Major General Ashok Mehta, who has sometimes been your more sensible and articulate TV general. He also writes quite often. Yet another aside about him, he subsequently married prominent political journalist Aditi Phadnis. I can make a disclosure also now. The original tip-off on the Tamil rebel training camps in India, the story that I wrote in India Today in March 1984, had come from Aditi's late mother, Urmila Phadnis, a highly respected international affairs professor at JNU. Now, don't say that reporter stories are filled with digressions. They are all interconnected, and that's why first person, second draft. Shujit's film suggested that the LTTE knew all about IPKF's moves because some traitor was leaking to them. He was only halfway right. There were no traitors leaking to the LTTE then. But the LTTE knew for sure. As the IPKF later discovered, the LTTE communications, electronics, eavesdropping ability was on par with modern armies. An Army College of Combat team later researched the disasters, particularly at Jaffna University, and concluded that the Tigers had intercepted the IPKF wireless on the assault night. Even so, they knew Indian Army was coming, how they were coming, where were they going to be landed. Even the range and height settings of their machine guns was perfect when the helicopters arrived. The 5 brigades that converged on Jaffna city moved at different speeds and suffered a varying but high number of casualties. But the brigade that suffered the least, the 18th, also reached Jaffna the fastest. Some lessons there. Why? I learned during those many conversations over long nights spent at the regrouping and recuperating units field headquarters. That brigade's commander, Brigadier J.S. Jogi Dhillon, I think he lives in Chandigarh, spoke at length about Jiu-Jitsu, the concept of Jiu-Jitsu, of how to turn your enemy's strengths against him. So, enemy's strength was to pick you out using snipers in daylight. So, his troops would now move only at night and only through fields and lagoons, avoiding all roads, thereby skirting minefields and snipers. But most importantly, he showed the courage and military dash to use the most potent weapon in the IPKF's armory, the deadly Mi-25 helicopter gunships, the only time that weapon has ever been used in our history. His brigade had taken the Tiger stronghold of Chavakacheri, where Prabhakaran executed Mahataya and his 257 soldiers in 1994, on 28 December 1994. Heavy casualties were anticipated for his brigade, 18th, in taking Chavakacheri, because it was widely believed that it is heavily invested and also heavily defended by the LTTE. Brigadier Dhillon prevailed upon the High Command to let him use Mi-25s. If I have the helicopter gunships, he said, why should I not use them? All that the gunships did was to fire just 32 rockets at the Chavakacheri bus station, supposed to be the LTTE's nerve center. He took the town with just 3 casualties on his side, just 3 casualties. There was the predictable outcry that many of the 28 Tamils killed by the Mi-25 rockets were innocent civilians, but Jogi Dhillon's point was, so what were they doing at the bus stand? But Jogi Dhillon's point was, so what were they doing at the bus stand when fighting was going on and they knew that the army was coming in? He quoted the Chetwood Oath to me, which made the safety and well-being of his troops next only to his nation's security for an Indian army officer. As the Americans used to sometimes call Vietnam, Shekhar, this is a dirty little war and people will die. He said, and because many will die, they better be yours than mine. Now, Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket had probably not released in India by then, so I'm not sure he borrowed that line from the young Marine there, although it was spoken in a different context. Dhillon Brigadiers Manjeet Singh of the battered 41st Brigade. He, by the way, won a Mahavir Chakra in Jaffna. To add to the Veer Chakra, he had won in Chushul in 1962. And B.D. Mishra of the 72nd spoke of other experiences and lessons. How the Tigers had rigged Chinese-made sniper chairs. See that picture on your screens? We have it courtesy of India Today. How the Tigers had rigged Chinese-made sniper chairs on the top of palm trees where sharpshooters waited entire days with rifles equipped with telescopic sights. How they expertly picked out officers from Indian columns, a skill taught to them sadly by our own army instructors when we were handing club with them. Also, their expertise with electronics and explosives and their ability to marry both. At one point, the IPKF was so harassed by IEDs electronically detonated from distance that it cut off power to Jaffna Peninsula for several days. On the way back from Jaffna and subsequent visits to Sri Lanka as well, I was given generous audiences by J.N. Mani Dixit, our High Commissioner, in the newly built Chancery, a monument to disastrous CPWD architecture and L1 construction at such a premium oceanfront spot. Dixit, by the way, had once chided me for that 1984 training camp story, but was now so genuinely affectionate. The Sri Lankan media mocked him as Viceroy, and Mani smirked as only he could as he cleaned and dusted his pipe and looked out of his window at the two Indian Navy frigates routinely anchored close enough for you to see the markings and ensigns at Colombo. Sadly, Shekhar, I'm quoting him, sadly, Shekhar, you've proven to be right and we so wrong with the Tigers. I wish we had taken that story more seriously. He said, these thugs were never to be trusted and I am sure nobody ever would. Not much later, Premadasa did, the president of Sri Lanka after Jayawardene. Not much later, he trusted the Tigers and paid with his life. That story I will tell you subsequent to this episode. But Mani also said another important thing. He said the IPKF experience had told him India was still not ready to be a big power. The first evening of fighting, he said, and I knew we were not yet ready for force projection overseas and willing to pay the price for it, politically or militarily. We are a long way from becoming a big power, he said. Of course, over almost 2 decades, we became close friends as our paths crossed in Pakistan, where he was High Commissioner, and later when he served as Foreign Secretary of India. After retiring, he wrote a regular column for the Indian Express when I edited it, and then returned to South Block as UPA's first National Security Advisor. But you could see that he was somehow stressed out in that job. The Mani Dixit smirk and twinkle were now missing. At a dinner at my home for Fareed Zakaria on 2nd January 2005, I asked Mani why he looked so stressed out. Then he spoke that other line which I have borrowed often in many contexts as a political journalist. And the line was, and I quote from Mani Dixit, it takes you a lifetime learning the ways of this benighted city. And by the time you learn them, it is too late in life to be of much use to you. As more guests came in, he said we should meet again at leisure and he would explain what he meant. That was not to be. Dixit had a heart attack later that night, and next morning so many of us, friends, fans, admirers and sometimes sparring partners, were at his funeral. Frankly, he would have been a much better man to tell you the story of that bloody period in Sri Lanka than any journalist watching from the sidelines or filmmaker skirting political minefields. To this story, there is an epilogue, because this series, First Person Second Draft, was part sparked by the movie Madras Cafe, but part also because serendipitously, it was around that time that I was invited in Colombo to deliver the annual India-Sri Lanka Friendship Society lecture. In fact, the memento I got for that lecture still sits in my room. You can see it here. I got some lashing in the Colombo press in 2013 for saying some things at this India-Sri Lanka Society Independence Day banquet. What did I say? I said that the country, Sri Lanka, seemed to be missing the real peace dividend that should have followed the successful completion of a long war. Where is the creative, liberal, civil society renaissance that usually follows such wars? I said the army was still too big, and with 4% of the able-bodied Sinhala male population still in uniform, India has less than 0.2%. The political and institutional balance was skewed unhealthily. I also spoke of the need to celebrate diversity and to build stronger institutions, as in a democracy, that was the natural protection against majoritarian excess. I got calls from Colombo journalists saying I had challenged Sri Lanka's sovereignty and attacked its judiciary, etc., etc. This was fallacious, I told them. I told them also that I believed, on the contrary, that Mahinda Rajapaksa made a historic contribution to his nation and did a great favor to India and Tamil Nadu by ridding us all of the cruelest, the most deceitful fascist force in our history. For that, he deserves India's gratitude, and the LTTE deserves nobody's sympathy. But Sri Lanka's peace dividend should not be confined to a construction boom. That was the point then, and we know what happened in Sri Lanka since then. Rajapaksa also became a dictator of sorts, elected dictator. His entire family took over the government. I think at one point he had 6 close family members in his cabinet. Finally, a democratic popular movement threw him out. Fresh elections were held, and a peaceful transfer of power, as always happens or should happen in all classical democracies, has taken place. That is also Sri Lanka's peace dividend. The fact is that in India, we were so scared politically of celebrating the fact that Indian soldiers went and fought in Sri Lanka at great cost to themselves, made great sacrifices, that there was no memorial built for them in India. It is the Rajapaksa government which built this memorial in Colombo. I took a picture of the memorial on one of those visits, and there will be people in Colombo today, including in Sri Lankan Armed Forces, the veterans who would have worked or interacted with General Amar Kalkat and will have fond memories of him.